Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Montanaro. I'm the Director of Education here at the Hanover Theatre and Conservatory. And I just want to thank you for joining us today for the Business of Booking Broadway with our President and CEO, Troy Siebels. We've just started doing a series of these webinars to make sure that we're staying engaged with our customers and our members and our subscribers and our students over this time. And we're so excited to be joined by you today and have this opportunity to talk with you. Over the course of the next few months, you'll see more opportunities like these, and we hope that you'll join us again. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and welcome our President and CEO, Troy Siebels, who will be doing the presentation today.
So I'm going to go through today, and we're going to do a bit of an overview of the whole Broadway and touring theater world. I know that it can fascinate people. It can also be a little bit opaque and difficult to understand. So over the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to take a high-level look at the industry as a whole, and then I will tie it back to the shows that do come to our stage, how they're chosen, and how they get here. So the first thing I think I would say is that it's important to know that the whole live theater and Broadway world is very connected. So what happens in Worcester is very much driven by what happens in New York in the 50 or so Broadway theaters there. Someday we'll do a whole other session on how musicals are born and developed and once in a great while make it to Broadway. But for today's purposes, we're going to start with something once it gets to Broadway. So I'm going to dig into the nuts and bolts of a Broadway show just a bit. I'm going to talk about how the touring shows come to be. We'll take a look at the money, where the money goes. We'll take a look at how we end up with a specific season of shows here in Worcester. And then we'll look a little bit at what COVID-19 has done to us. It's been a big impact, obviously, on us. So I'm going to start with an example. We're going to call it Troy's Broadway Musical. Not very creative title. Every show on Broadway has a producer or a group of producers that come together and put up the money needed to mount the production. A Broadway show has, there's two ways they look at that money. The first is the capitalization, and the next is a run cost. So the capitalization is upfront costs, and that includes things like the salaries for the director, the choreographer, the designers, the cost to build the set and the costumes, the salaries of the actors and stage managers during rehearsals. All that could add up to anywhere from $10 million to $60 million. That's rare. I'm going to use an example for here of a show that has a $30 million capitalization, which is not atypical. Now, the weekly run cost, on the other hand, is the cost to keep the show up and running once it is running. So now this is the salaries of the folks that are in the production, the actors, the stage managers, the musicians in the pit, the technical crew backstage, the theater rent, the ushers and the ticket takers, and then the equipment that they rent. So in my example, I'm going to say the weekly run cost for Troy's Broadway musical is $400,000. Now, a typical Broadway theater has 1,000 seats. Ticket prices are all over the map, but let's just say that an average ticket is $140 and a little piece of that goes to Ticketmaster. So maybe the show ends up with $125. So $125 times 1,000 seats times 8 performances a week is $1 million per week at sellout. Troy's Broadway musical only deals with round numbers. That's the good thing about it. So now the cost to run, as you remember, was $400,000. So of that $1 million, $600,000 goes back to the producers to repay them for that upfront investment. So in order to recoup their entire $30 million, the show needs to run for about 50 weeks to break even. That's about average. Most shows break even after about 1 year. There's some outliers, but there's also shows that close in one night. The problem is that the average Broadway show doesn't run 50 weeks. It only runs about 40, and some are much shorter. So most shows today don't break even in New York. They wait until the tour. They need the tour in order to break even. So that's the case with my hypothetical show here as well. So I need now to put together a tour. Most often the same actors aren't going to go out on tour. The set that we used in Broadway wasn't built to come apart and go in and out of tractor trailers. I need to produce a whole new show, but I'm going to do it by recreating a new version of that Broadway show. I'm going to either use the same director, or more often than not, it's an assistant director who works with the new cast to teach the same blocking, the same style, the same interpretation of the script as the Broadway director. The set will be the same or as close as I can get to the same. Sometimes Broadway shows have bells and whistles that aren't quite possible on the road, so it might get simplified if it has to, but the look and feel of it is going to be the same as the New York show. They're trying to capture that brand and send it out to the rest of the country. When we say a Broadway tour, we mean a touring show that's built to replicate a show that's running on Broadway or just did run on Broadway. There are other shows out there that aren't, shows that are built just to tour. We might call those revival tours or just national tours. Maybe nobody knows the difference, but for the most part, we at the Hanover try to focus on newer shows or new revivals coming off of Broadway because that really sets a higher bar for quality, which is really important to us. So let's look at who the people are. The New York producer who produced the show in New York starts everything. They may choose to produce the tour themselves, or they may go find someone else to do it. The first tour of the show is called a first national tour, and it's as close to the Broadway show as they can get. It's big. We measure sometimes touring shows in size by number of trucks it fits in. So a first national tour could be anywhere from 8 to 18 tractor trailers full of scenery, lights, costumes, props, and all the other things they need when they go to a regional venue. So when a first national tour comes to Worcester, it takes us 50 to 60 at least local stagehands that we supply, plus 2 days usually to load in. Those tours always play at least one or more full weeks in each city. The cost of each venue, the cost of that big a crew to load a show in and out is just too high for them to make any sense out of playing more than one city in a week. When we have these kinds of shows in Worcester, they run a full week of 8 performances. Most recently, On Your Feet, Waitress, Beautiful, all fit in this category. Those are all first national tours. Once the tour's been on the tour for a year or two, it's played all the cities that can support a show for 8 performances, they'll go back out and retool it to scale it back. They simplify the set a little bit, maybe a fewer moving lights, maybe a few less musicians in the orchestra pit, maybe a few less actors in the chorus. It goes back out, and now it can play split weeks, meaning that they could do 2 or 3 performances at the start of the week in one city, and then 5 or 6 performances at the end of the week in a different city. Now it fits in somewhere from 5 to 8 or so tractor trailer trucks. Some of our shows fit in this category. We have 6 subscribed performances, so everything we do runs at least 6 performances. Thursday through Sunday, Thursday through Sunday. Tuesday and Wednesday, that show might be in Schenectady or New Brunswick or something. And then finally, after that tour's been out for a couple of years, they'll retool it again and scale it back so it fits in 2 or 3 trucks, takes a lot less time to load in. Now it can play one-nighters, as many as 6 different cities in 1 week, if you can believe that. We have had a couple of those tours in the building over the past 13 years, but not in the last few years. The scale and quality of those shows aren't quite where we want it to be for our audience. Okay, so the next step is the producer goes out and hires a booking agent. His or her job is to match the show up with the theaters across the country. This is an incredibly complicated puzzle. They have to consider things like which theaters want the show, who's trying to buy this performance of Troy's musical, what dates are available in each of those buildings, how close is that theater to the other cities nearby where the show recently played. What's the overnight drive time from this city to that city? If I load out of one theater at 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday and I'm on the road by 1 in the morning, can I be at the loading dock of the next city by 8 a.m. the following morning? And then the last steps in the chain are the local promoter and the venue. In our case, we're both of these. In some cases, like at the Boston Opera House, that's a venue that's owned by one company, and there's a different company, Broadway Across America, that rents that theater and brings the shows in. We actually work with a company that's based out of Providence, that their home base is Providence Performing Arts Center. They book shows, Broadway shows, into about a dozen theaters, mostly up and down the East Coast. We co-promote our Broadway shows with them, which means that if the show does well and makes money, we share 50-50. And if it loses money, we share that 50-50 as well. By working with them, we just get a little more leverage. Essentially, we're buying for a dozen theaters and not just one. So I'm going to move to look at the money and what it means to promote a Broadway show at the Hanover Theatre. So let's go back to our typical show. I'm going to look at this from the perspective of where does the ticket money go? So for an average size Broadway tour show, we might sell about $400,000 in tickets. That's $6,000 to $8,000, 6 to 8,000 tickets. We guarantee a fixed amount to the producer of the show. So in my example, that's $200,000. And as a side note, his run cost is probably $180 or something. So there's a little bit of that goes back to help him cover the capitalization that he didn't pay back in New York. The other major costs are 10% to the playwright and the composer, the advertising, local stagehands, and that leaves about $50,000 left over for the theater. Whoops, nope. Actually, the producer gets 70% of that because they, in fact, invested all those millions up front. So it really leaves about $15,000 for the theater. Whoops, nope. Remember, we co-promote 50-50 with the company based at PPAC. So they get half, leaving $7,500 for the theater. So out of $400,000 in ticket sales, we get to keep about $7,500. Now, how crazy is that? How could we possibly stay in business? Well, the answer, of course, is all these other things. The handling fee you pay when you bought your tickets, the drink you bought at the bar. Hopefully there's a corporate sponsor that will support us and put their name on the show. So that's how we stay in business. It's all the other pieces. And those are all driven by how many people come through the doors, even if it's not the amount of the ticket purchase from those folks. So that's a little snapshot of how the business model works. Now, the big $1 million question we always get is, how do you decide which shows each year come to the Hanover Theatre? This is one of the questions that was submitted today, actually. How do you decide which shows come to the Hanover, and can you take us through your process? Yes, let's do exactly that. So this is a list of all the touring shows that were out on the road in the 2018-2019 season. I could create a new list for this year, but it's the same process. I'm going to use this example. This year's list is still floating around in the air a little bit because of COVID. So it would be great if we could just look at this list and pick the shows we wanted. However, some of these shows don't actually go out on the road after all. Maybe they couldn't put it together in time. Maybe there weren't enough theaters wanting to book that particular show for them to put together a tour. They'll try again next year and go out the following year, or else they won't go out. Then there are some shows whose ticket sales they find are starting to drop off on the road, and they start losing rather than making money. So the producers will close that tour down rather than choose to keep it out there on the road. Then there are always a handful of the mega blockbusters out there that are so big they can't play for just a week or two. They're not 8 to 18 tractor trailers. They're 30 tractor trailers full of show, and they only go to the largest markets. They play for 5 weeks or more at a time. This is why we don't yet have Wicked or The Lion King on our calendar. Then we are in the shadow of Boston. And we're in the Boston media market. So when I live in Shrewsbury, when I watch network TV in Shrewsbury, I'm watching Boston network TV. And they're not going to allow a producer's not going to allow his show to compete with itself. So if a show is playing in Boston, it's not going to play in Worcester the same year. So anything that's Broadway Across America announces in Boston is not going to play in Worcester that year. What's more, Broadway Across America has theaters in 26 cities around the country. They are a lot bigger than we are and a lot more leverage. So if they have plans to bring a show to Boston next year, they will put pressure on booking agents to prevent that show from playing Worcester this year. So in effect, there's 2 years worth of Boston, which we have to pull out of our list. And then there are shows for which it just doesn't work on the calendar or on the map. This goes back to that drive time thing. It may be that a given show is only going to play west of the Mississippi during a given year, and then they'll be back to the East Coast the following year. So we go through all those reasons why the shows are not available to us. And now the titles on this page in black are the ones that are open and possible for us to book. So now we take a look at that list. First off, some of them have been here already, right? So we'll take out the ones that have been on stage. Then there are a few that we just don't think are strong enough. to work in Worcester. A show like A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder won the Tony for Best Musical in New York. It's amazing. It's incredibly funny, but it's a title that doesn't mean a huge amount to audiences outside of New York. And the tour had a lot of trouble selling tickets on the road. We didn't feel it would work in Worcester. So that's how we get down to a season of 7 shows. In this case, as you will see, this is 2 seasons ago, we actually went back to include 2 that had already played in Worcester. One of the questions was submitted today. One of you asked, why are we seeing repeat shows in the subscription? This is the answer. Sometimes we need them to fill out the subscription, and we try hard to choose shows that were particularly strong the first time around. The Wizard of Oz and Elf the Musical were both blockbuster hits the first time they were in there, and we try shows that were that haven't been here for at least 5 years and hopefully longer. For a show like Blue Man Group next year, it actually is new material. It's not the same show. You could think of it as a sequel, but it is different material. Another of the questions that was submitted for today was, will Wicked ever come through the doors? Yes. Absolutely, I can say unequivocally, as will Hamilton, as will The Lion King, as will Phantom of the Opera. Our proximity to Boston is the reason they haven't been here yet. There are some things we can do to try to bring shows to the Hanover as early in their lifespan as we can. We can commit to avoiding some Boston media sometimes. That's not a silver bullet. It doesn't make it a no-brainer, but it can help us make the case to the producers and the booking agents for allowing a show to play Worcester. We can hold off on announcing a title until after the show closes in Boston. This is a big one, and this is another one of the questions submitted today, is why are all shows in the new season not announced at the same time? So this year, as you know, we've currently announced 5 of next year's 7 Broadway shows, and by agreeing to hold our announcement until the end of a given show's run in Boston, we get access to titles that would otherwise have to wait another full year. And then we'd risk having the tour close or be on the West Coast or not be possible for one of the other reasons. So for this to work though, our subscribers have to be willing to buy into a series without knowing what all the titles are. This is the great news for us. Fortunately, our subscribers have been willing, and we are finding that our audiences are starting to trust that we will bring good and high quality shows to the stage. And even if they don't know that much about the show before they come, they leave having had a really great experience. A couple of years ago, we had Something Rotten and Bright Star on the Broadway series during the same year. Most people hadn't heard of either one of them. And they weren't the reason anybody subscribed necessarily. But by the end of the season, those were the 2 shows that were the best received and most highly acclaimed and lauded in Worcester. This year, we started what we call our loyal subscriber program for those that are ready to invest in us without having the titles and dates. In fact, we had more than 3,000 people renew their subscriptions for next year without knowing a single title for next year. That blew away our expectations, and it really makes a difference. And I want to thank you to those of you on this call. Most of you are subscribers. Some of you are quote loyal subscribers. I don't love that title because all the subscribers are loyal, incredibly important to us. But those who are willing to take that risk with us and travel with us on this journey, we are so grateful. The last thing is that we can continue to build our subscription base. This is the single most important thing that we can do, and it's a marathon, not a race. As of today, we have about 3,500 subscribers. COVID-19 has put a bit of a hiccup in that growth curve, but we will strive to continue to increase that number over time. In this industry, as in pretty much any industry, I think it's about the dollars. The show producers want to make sure they break even and make money on the tours to recoup what they lost in New York. So subscribers represent a guarantee that a certain number of tickets are sold before we even go on sale with single tickets. They know from day one that their show in our building is already sold 3,500 tickets before we go on sale. The higher that number it gets, the higher that number of subscribers gets, the more it becomes clear that by not playing Worcester, a show's leaving money on the table. So when a subscriber asks, when will Wicked come? I will go through this explanation. When a common Joe on the street asks, when will Wicked come? I just say, well, after you subscribe. On that note, I would be remiss if I didn't say that it's not too late to subscribe for next season, for those of you who are not already subscribers. Here are, whoops, that's not what I looked for. Hold on. Here we go. Here are the 5 shows that we've announced thus far for next season. And there are 2 more coming. It's a series I'm really proud of. This is Mean Girls, Cats, Escape to Margaritaville, The Band's Visit, and Blue Man Group. And it's going to be it's a great series. The Band's Visit is a Tony winner, and there is nothing about any of these shows that I wouldn't stand behind and be incredibly proud of, and the 2 we have yet to announce as well. So I hope that the audience will continue to stick with us, even if they're not familiar with all these, and know that what we're bringing to Worcester is at a really high level of quality. So now let's look briefly at the impact of COVID-19. When the pandemic hit Massachusetts in March, we shut down everything. Our conservatory programs shut down for just a week. They retooled, and then we reopened, offering all of those theater and dance classes online. We are really proud of that. There are others that are trying to do this, but frankly, I'm not sure they're doing it as well as we're doing. I'm so proud of our education team and the caliber that we are able to offer online. Is it exactly the same as it would be in a studio? No, but I'm not sure it's worse. You know, maybe as an actor you learn different skills, but they are essential skills one way or another, and I'm really proud of that. Now, the theater itself is called a quote large indoor venue, so we qualify to fit in phase 4 of Governor Baker's reopening plan. At this point, we've canceled all performances through mid-October, and we are hopeful we'll be able to reopen at that time, but it's still far from certain. Every theater in the country is in our same situation, every one of our peers. As theaters started closing in March and April, the touring shows found themselves with a week booked in Omaha, and then a canceled week that was supposed to be in Chicago, and then a week in Des Moines, and then another week off. And the tours they're too expensive to be able to shut down and take dark weeks without performances. They pay the cast and the folks on the road whether they're performing or not. So they found themselves in an untenable situation, and one by one, those touring shows shut down. They were all scheduled to reopen in September with a fully booked year of performances, September through May or June. Some of the markets that lost out on their shows this spring, though, went back to the producers and say, wait a minute, what about us? I lost the show in May, and now you're not gonna play my theater next year. So the booking agents went back out to some of the smaller markets to say, I can't bring you that show in October. I need to play this bigger city that it was supposed to play last April. That's exactly how, that happened to us specifically with respect to Escape to Margaritaville next season. We had it scheduled to be in October, but for that exact reason, we were bumped back to next January. And then in May and June, as we all got a better understanding of this pandemic, it became clear that at least some of us weren't going to be able to open in the 1st of September. The shows found themselves in the same situation in the fall, a week scheduled here, a canceled week there. And because they can't work that way, one by one, all of these touring shows pulled out for the entire fall. They've canceled fall performances and scheduled themselves to open in January, February. I think that's not the worst thing for us because I think people need a little more time. We need a little more time to be allowed to open by the state and for people to feel comfortable coming into a large venue. I think that over the coming months, our shows and dates may continue to move around as the booking agents try again to make sense of the touring map, and they try to squeeze into next spring cities that were canceled in the fall. So I want to thank you in advance for your patience. Our subscribers are the most important thing to us, and we're going to do everything we can to give you good customer service, even in the face of frustrating change. Another question submitted today was, are you considering a reduced size subscription, less than 7 shows? I think it's possible that we could lose 1 or more shows from next year's 7-show season. And if that were to happen, you would always have the option for a full refund or to apply that pro rata prescription or piece of the subscription to the following year. We also do have what we call a flex package, where you can buy 4 or 5 or 6 shows and get a discount below regular ticket prices. And you can buy it before single tickets, so you get better seats. Flex ticket holders don't get all the same benefits as subscribers, because such as keeping the same seats from show to show or year to year, because we really want people to commit to that full season. We really want to be able to leverage those subscribers to bring in the newer shows. It's easier for us to bring in the better shows that everybody wants to see the more of those 7-show subscribers we have. So I hope you'll be understanding of that. We hope that you will commit to that 7-show season, even if you're going to be out of town for 1 or 2 shows, and give the tickets to the kids or grandkids or the neighbors to enjoy. Another person asked for today, I'd like to know if the theater will open at full capacity, and if not, how will we enjoy our assigned subscriber seats? We will open at full capacity for the Broadway shows. There may be some things we could do with a reduced capacity, selling alternate rows with empty seats between groups, but for the most part, and certainly for the Broadway series, there's just no way to make that work financially for us, unfortunately. The shows can't spend more time in Worcester without a major cost implication for us, and we don't break even until we get to 80% capacity or something like that. So that's one of the reasons why theaters like ours, big performance spaces, are going to be among the last places to reopen, because we don't have that same flexibility that some producing nonprofit theaters have, that can sort of move more quickly and scale the performances that they're going to put on next year down to the point where they could do it with 1/3 of an audience. Let's see, I'm a slide off, so let me bypass this. When we do reopen, it will be under a pretty stringent set of health and safety protocols. Our country is pretty far behind the rest of the world on fighting COVID. The upside of that, silver lining, is that we can see what theaters in other parts of the world are doing. Right now, our industry worldwide is talking about things like requiring face coverings, digital tickets or scanning tickets without touching, digital program books, things like thermal cameras or scanners to identify anyone with a high temperature before they enter the theater. None of these are a silver bullet by themselves, but collectively they help to keep the venue cleaner and healthier for those that are attending. Touchless hand sanitizer stations every few steps throughout the lobbies, prepackaged concessions items, if in fact we can do concessions at all. So much of this is evolving over time, and we are watching other theaters around the world to see what they do successfully. Aggressive and continuous almost cleaning of high touch surfaces like railings and doors, and then disinfecting of the entire theater after every performance using electrostatic spraying equipment. Things like potentially timed entry, encouraging people that are in rows A through L to arrive before people who are in rows M through Z, for instance, and then multiple points of exit too. Those sort of times when you would ordinarily have the biggest clot of people, how do you spread that out so people aren't congested together quite the same way? We are also not sitting and watching a performance with 2,000 people facing the same direction in the theater is not the same kind of super spreader event as some of the other things that the CDC has identified, things like karaoke bars or conferences with lots of different breakout spaces. It sounds like 2,000 people under one roof ought to be the worst it could possibly be, and it's just not true. Unfortunately, we get a little bit of a bad rap because people assume the bigger the number, the greater the risk. And it's really more about how the people are interacting and moving around to talk or connect with one another. So it is too early to know what the total financial impact is going to be of us, on us, of COVID. Based on the canceled performances this spring and in the early fall, even with some pretty drastic cuts and furloughs of some staff, we will see a loss of somewhere around $1.8 million. The longer our opening is delayed, the greater that number will be. We also know that things will take some time to ramp up to where we were before. So we expect that we could have a couple of tough years after that. As I said, we will be one of the last places that are able to open, but we will survive this, and we will do it with the help of a generous and supportive audience. We did get, you're looking at some of the funding sources that'll help us bridge that gap. We did get some federal support through a Paycheck Protection Program loan. We did recently complete a capital campaign called a Theater District campaign. And we did go back to some of the major donors to that campaign and secured their permission to repurpose those contributions to help keep us afloat and keep our staff employed as much as possible. And then there were a lot of people who donated their tickets to canceled shows or made contributions to what we call our COVID-19 Resiliency Fund. For those of you on the line today who have donated to the fund, I want to say a special thank you. I know that you love this theater as I do, and you want to see us come back strong. And again, I would be remiss if I didn't say that we still needed the support. So if you haven't had a chance to contribute and you're of the mind to do so, that you'll find a link prominently on the homepage of the hanovertheatre.org. So we're grateful for your consideration. We do still have time for a few questions, and there were a couple questions submitted that didn't fit easily into the presentation thus far, so I'm going to start with those. One just came in and says, how versatile is our stage, and are there stage productions that are too big or elaborate? Lion King or Phantom of the Opera that are two that come to mind. They are two of the big ones. Lion King will fit on our stage. Phantom of the Opera and Wicked both use the same steel is the slang for it in the industry. The limiting point, we have a couple of limiting points. The physical size of our stage on the floor is one, and the capacity of the grid over our stage and over our theater to support weight is another. There are the tour of Phantom of the Opera that was out a few years ago looked at our venue and wasn't ever able to make a commitment to come to Worcester, so we never had to dot the I's or cross the T's on it, but it looked like we were going to need to invest something like $50,000 to add some steel to increase the weight capacity. There are shows that need 50 or 60 tons of weight to be able to be hung from the grid. The footprint of the stage is smaller than some venues, and it does create headaches for some of the touring shows, but has not been a limiting factor so far because they put these shows on the road, and they benefit from having that show be able to play as many stages around the country as it possibly can, and not every stage is the same. So they find ways to scale the show. It may be that there is a piece of scenery that won't fit in one theater that will fit in the next theater. So it is possible that they will pull something out if it doesn't fit. We have not run into this problem. We've never had a show to date that has not come to Worcester because it won't fit in the theater. I think that we will make a commitment to do whatever we have to do to get a show like Phantom of the Opera, and we would have invested those dollars because a show like that is not just the run, it's also brands the theater and the scale of what we're able to do. Okay, the next question that came in here is, how will COVID-19 affect young non-union performers? Will they be more or less desirable when auditions resume? And what should young adult performers be doing during this gap in performing? Actors Equity is the professional union for actors in the US, and they've issued some pretty strong guidelines for what the conditions need to be in order for their members to go back to work. Numbers of new COVID-19 cases in the area, they need to be low and they need to stay low. The theaters and their municipalities need to have capacity to do ongoing testing and cleaning to keep the actors safe. I'm not sure that any of the demands, if you could call them that Actors Equity are making are all that different from what all of the states are going to require anyway in order for theaters to reopen. We do our production of A Christmas Carol with a mix of union and non-union performers. It would be too big a jump for us to try to do it entirely non-union. So we're hopeful that that Actors Equity will allow their performers to work this year and will be allowed to open in time for this year's show. There may, though, be other theaters. I'm thinking of some of the smaller companies throughout Greater Boston that could try to return sooner with non-equity actors and a socially distanced audience, alternating rows or such. So I would say you could keep eyes open for the first auditions you see posted in the coming months. And I also think what a young adult performer could be doing during this time is continuing to study online. there are lots of opportunities out there, including our own conservatory, that are doing a really good job of teaching virtually. And you could look for some ways to engage with some of the theaters in this region that employ young actors from time to time. I see the artistic directors at New Rep in Watertown, or Lyric Stage or Speakeasy in Boston. The artistic directors doing online webinars or discussions to continue to engage audiences. So now I can sit in my home in Shrewsbury or Paxton, and at the same time I can be in the living room of the artistic director of Speakeasy Stage. This is a really hard business, but it's also a business of people and connections, and all the networking you can do will help. So ironically, this has helped bring us closer together in some ways. You can actually make connections with people that otherwise you wouldn't run into on the street. And then the last question that came in advance was this: what does the holiday lineup look like currently, and how's the search for the new Scrooge going? We are currently on scheduled for both of our in-house productions, for the Nutcracker and A Christmas Carol. And we're paying close attention to what the state is telling us, the progress on the reopening plan. We would be very much disappointed if we had to cancel either or both of those productions this year. We will do anything we can to make sure that we're able to present them. We had, with respect to A Christmas Carol, we had an audition in New York scheduled in May to go find an Ebenezer Scrooge to headline this year's production. We had to cancel that audition with the shutdown. We could make, we will have to restart that process, but we could make a decision as late as September and schedule an audition in October to find our Scrooge and still be okay. In another year, that might be really late to cast a role like this, but every actor in the world is sitting at home in their living room right now and not out and auditioning and committing to other shows. So it does mean something that it's not just us, that we're all going through this. We, our whole industry, the whole world is going through this together. So that's the extent of the questions that had come in advance. We do have some time, I think, if anybody has another question or comment.
Yeah, I'm jumping back in. Megan Montanero, Director of Education. I'll go ahead and let you know what questions have come into the Q&A in the chat. And as we answer them, feel free, everyone who's joined us, to keep putting those questions in, and we'll take as many as we can. The first one is coming from Lynette, and she's asking, do you expect that the 2021-2022 season will start in the fall of 2021? Or do you anticipate ending up on a calendar year season as a result of the reshuffling and rescheduling?
What an interesting question. There could be a year or two of transition. So we've got one of the shows next year, there is a potential that it could move to the early fall, for instance. So we could be looking at a season for 2020, 2021 that would bleed into the fall of 2021. I think, though, that ultimately we will get ourselves back on a September through June schedule, because our industry really works on a September through June schedule. And ultimately, that's just going to make more sense for us. It may be that we have a stub season that has fewer shows, or that we have another really specifically 2021 could bleed into the fall in order for us to get all the shows in that we're able to retain as part of that season. But we will get back to a September through May.
Great. Our next one, would the theater consider doing any outdoor events?
Sure. I think that there are little bits and pieces of things that we can do once we're allowed to. Right now, the state is still prohibiting events over, I think, 10 people. So, once we're able to return, and I think that they will relax that. I believe they'll relax that in July, but we don't have a lot of specifics yet as to numbers. But there are things that we could do. We are currently still planning and hoping to do a Jazz at Sunset event. These are these two outdoor concerts that we've done out behind the theater for the last couple of years. We've canceled the July one for this year because it felt too close and we didn't have enough security that we would be permitted to do it. We are still holding a date of August 7th for the one in August, and hopeful that we'll be able to keep that. And we've tried to be creative about other things that we could do outside. We will do whatever we can to try to stay on people's radar, to try to stay relevant to people as we're closed. It really bothers me that we're going to be one of the last venues, our type of venue is going to be one of the last places to reopen, and folks are going to feel like they're way past COVID-19 and we're still closed. So we're going to do everything we can to continue to engage with the audience, and we'll do what we can in terms of outdoor events. Yes.
Another one from Andrew Perlman. Is the Hanover one of the larger capacity theaters on the Broadway tour circuit, or large relative to the size of the city it's in? And if so, how does the large capacity affect your operations?
It's actually on the smaller side of the theaters that host these sorts of tours. The Boston Opera House in Boston is about 300 seats bigger than we are. The Bushnell in Hartford and Providence Performing Arts Center are both several hundred seats bigger than we are, but we're in the realm, in that 2,100 to 2,800, 3,000 seat range that most venues like us are in. It's a good size for our city. There are days, sure, that I wish that we had another 100 seats in the back, but for the most part, it's the right size theater for a city the size of Worcester. And ultimately, the limitation is how many tickets your market can support, not how many seats fit in your theater, obviously. So we have not, the number of shows which we sell every single seat in the theater, as much as we'd like people to think we sell at every single show, the number of shows that sell every seat are still pretty limited, and there is generally capacity. So it works for us. It's big enough for us to be able to attract the shows that can sell out in Worcester.
All right, next from Susan. Do any of the production companies comment on what it is like to do a show in Worcester? Are we a good audience?
We are a good audience. We've had some good comments, actually. We get compliments on the audiences and on crews that work backstage. We also do a program that we call our Adopt a School each year, where we partner with 2 Worcester high schools. We integrate the themes of the show into literally every piece of the curriculum across the breadth of the show, into the schools. We integrate it into every single subject. The kids study and find a way to relate their studies to that show over about a 3-week period, and then we bring 2,300 kids to come see the show at a single performance. That in particular has been so moving and transformative, not just for the kids, but for the performers on stage, that it is talked about. The world of actors who are performing in touring shows know about Worcester because of those who have been here for one of those performances. That is one of the most memorable things we do.
All right, next from Michael. Would Six ever come to Hanover? It is so amazing.
Yes, absolutely. That's, in fact, because Six was born at American Repertory Theater in Cambridge, it will go to Boston. The Boston Opera House will want it, but they will be mindful of the fact that it has played in Cambridge already before it went to New York. And so we will be able to get that show sooner than we would have if it had started somewhere else and Boston wanted to try to do it twice, for instance, before it came here. We will absolutely get here. And it's also not an enormous show. So I'm looking forward to that one. I think it's going to be a blockbuster and it'll fit in the building nicely.
Next one, what has been your favorite part about working for the Hanover Theatre?
This is not the right ones to ask that question. Every day is different. I love doing a Christmas Carol each year because I still have artistic leanings and it helps me do that piece. I love this process of trying to find ways to get the best shows into our building, whether that be the Broadway shows or concerts or comedy or family shows or other things. I love being a connector in Worcester. I love being able to be a real part of this city and a driver. I wasn't sure before I came to the Hanover. I worked at a regional producing theater company where we created shows, and I wasn't sure whether I would still find the same, where I would be as interested or committed to a show that just brings in trucking shows and putting them on the stage. And I have found it absolutely challenging and rewarding because I find that we can really make a difference in this city, and I love that.
And what advice would you give to a student wanting to have a job like yours?
Don't go there. Go do something else. Be a doctor or a lawyer. No, I'm just kidding. It is a tough business for sure, but one of the big secrets about the theater business is that it's not just actors. There are lots and lots of other positions. There's people like me that make a living in this industry, and technical stuff too. You know, our conservatory, we teach classes for technicians in lighting, sound, stage management, set design, costume design. There are lots of opportunities for people who are interested in theater. Maybe they're actors today. I was an actor my first year in college, and then it didn't take long to learn that that was not going to be the right career for me, but I didn't want to lose theater. And so I found something else to try my passions. So I would continue to be involved in theater in any way. You don't have to say, I want to be a producing director. I want to be a producer. I want to be a director. It is almost equally valuable to be an actor or a technician backstage. Any way you can be involved in the industry or engaged right now will help build the experience you're going to need to do what I do or what any of us do.
There's a quote that I like where someone has turned up on its head the "do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life," and that's do what you love and you'll work super hard all the time with no separation and no boundaries, and also take everything extremely personally. But the other side of that is that you do get to do what you love and make an impact on the community around you, knowing that you're bringing what you love to those around you. So it's a double-edged sword. And our last question in the Q&A here is from Bob McCullum, and he wants to know what shows would fit under a reduced social distance format.
We need to do some work to look at whether that's something we think we could afford to do for our holiday productions. For A Christmas Carol or The Nutcracker, we haven't really done the work yet to decide, but the difference with those shows between those and the Broadway tours is they are ours and we control them, and we have more latitude for decisions around them. So it is theoretically potential that we could run. I'll talk from A Christmas Carol because that's my perspective. We could run for more performances to a smaller audience. If we were permitted to open and Actors Equity allowed their performers to perform, there are so many unknowns. There are things like Ricky Duran. Right now we're scheduled to open in October 10th with a Ricky Duran concert, and he's a hometown guy, a Grafton native, and we haven't talked to him about it, but he's the sort of person we could pick up the phone and talk to him and say, we can't sell 2,300 seats because they won't allow us to do that. We could sell 800 seats 3 times. Would you be willing to consider that? It's really all about a performer or an act or a show with whom we can have that conversation, that's willing to have that conversation. So those are the obvious answers. There are also smaller shows out there that would last year and 2 years ago have been playing 800 seat theaters that we could bring in because they could play to 800 seats. But they are also not the same visibility, or I'm not even saying they're not the same quality, but they're not the same profile as the sorts of events we usually do. And so I would be worried that our audience would perceive it as a step back for us. And so I'm reticent to do too much. I think that if there are things about which we feel really positive about the quality and that we could do with a limited audience, I think we would strive to do that, especially if it looks like we're going to be closed till January or something. But I think that the bulk of what we do, we really, we need the seats to be able to drive what we can put on the stage. So we want to do our part to help the rest of this country to the point where we can all go back to work together and seat all those seats and return to what we to the things we've been doing before, even if it means that we're doing it wearing a mask and with a digital program. We're committed to getting back to that caliber and that quality. So I think that's if that's the extent of the questions, I wanted to take another opportunity to say thank you to those who are subscribers, to those of you who have contributed to the Resiliency Fund, and to all of you for taking the time to come here this evening and allow us to engage you in a conversation.
Thank you, Troy, and thank you, Kelly Rourke, who's been working behind the scenes to make sure everything goes smoothly for us here and setting up this webinar. And also Lisa Condit, our Director of Marketing and PR. I just want to give her a shout out for always being a champion of our subscribers and doing a great job of always reminding us just how important and crucial you all are to our business. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that. And again, thank you all for being such great supporters of us, because as Troy said, the subscribers are really what allow us to get these wonderful shows that'll come through this market, because we can show that there's an audience here and a dedicated audience for it. And, so thank you for that. And thank you for Troy for spending this time with us today.
Thank you, everyone.